Good evening, everyone. My name is Jonathan Cook. I'm the Executive Director of Solano Pride Center, and I use he, him gender pronouns. This evening series, QChat, is brought to you by Solano Pride Center in partnership with Solano County Behavioral Health and the UC Davis Center for Reducing Health Disparities. Joining me is Adrian Asban, our project coordinator, and we also are lucky to have our three panelists this evening. We have joining us Bernardo Ortega, Maria Isip Batista, and Lauren Shine. So thank you very much, all of you, for joining us. Tonight's discussion topic is QTPOC, queer, trans, people of color, and what that means during Pride Month, and especially in the context of everything that's happening right now. Adrian, would you like to kick off our discussion?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I just wanted to throw into the reason for the webinar for the QChat series is mostly with our partnership with UC Davis Center for Reducing Health Disparities and Solano Behavioral Health under the umbrella project Solano County Innovations Project, which basically is to reduce stigma around mental health. And so, yeah, and we can definitely kickstart this discussion. Why don't we have everybody go around and kind of, I know everybody's part of the board, everybody knows each other here, but maybe out there we don't all know you. So if we want to go around and maybe just kind of tell us a little bit of background about yourselves, it'd be awesome. And whoever could go, there is no order. Whoever wants to go first, whoever feels comfortable going. So and go for it.
I guess I'll go first.
Alphabetical.
Alphabetical, yeah. So my name's Bernardo Ortega, and like Jonathan said, I'm on the board of Solano Pride Center. I've been on the board for, I think, 5 years or 4 years at least. It's been quite a while. I joined when I was, I think exiting high school is when I joined. And, Solano Pride Center has been in my life for quite a long time. And I am a queer person of color. I'm Hispanic, and I'm a student, hopefully almost a professional, soon to be finishing my program this week, actually. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Bernie. We appreciate it. Mm-hmm. We're excited to have a new nutritionist join all of us. So thank you.
Definitely. Thank you.
Okay, I can go ahead and go next. My name is Maria Isip Batista. I lived in many places, grew up in East San Jose, went to Davis and lived there for a very long time. Most recently have lived in Vallejo, and now just in the last couple of years moved to Benicia. I've been a faculty member at Solano Community College since 2012, and there developed and led the social justice program, which was the first disciplinary program at Solano to focus on race, ethnicity, and gender and sexuality. So learned a lot of what I know from having taught, and have done a lot of other work. My master's work was actually on the school to prison pipeline, and I did a public health project in the state prison system. So looking very specifically at the criminalization of Black and brown bodies, how the school system helps to send a disproportionate number of brown folks to prisons and jails. So that was a lot of my work. And I've also had a career in HR randomly. So I'm now seeing a lot of the unpacking of the unfolding of their social situation through the eyes of corporate America, and interesting to see how that's unfolding there.
Awesome. Thank you, Maria. I think your background is going to actually go really well with what we're discussing today. So that's awesome. Thank you.
Most definitely.
And next to Mr. Shine. Lawrence, would you like to go next? I don't think we can hear you at the moment. Can any of you folks hear Lawrence?
A little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
A little bit.
Okay, I tried turning my volume down because I don't want to echo so much. Let me try turning. you back up. Okay, that. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, go ahead.
So low volume?
No, that's good.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect. Yeah.
Great. I turned the volume up on I didn't like to call so much feedback. Okay. Well, I'm Lawrence Shine. I'm from the Biodiversity Coalition. I'm with an African American human rights group focused on LGBT communities, and I'm part of that group for 14 years now. So I won't go into my background too much because I'm a little bit older than everybody else here, so my resume is longer. So I don't want to claim all that. I'm just very honored and excited to be working with a group of dynamic people in their 20s and 30s, and even in a
And 40.
space to be able to oh, I didn't know it.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I didn't know that
Your
either.
age.
Really, I thought you're about 38. That's what I thought. That's what I thought you. But I'm excited to be working with a group of dynamic younger people, a little bit younger, maybe. I don't know, Maria's age. But to be able to be humble and open to seeing how different generations are doing things and be a part of that. We're very much focused on Black Lives Matter since the beginning of our group. And with the zeitgeist of what's happening in America today, it's a challenging, exciting time.
Awesome. Thank you. We can hear you now, so that's awesome. So really appreciate it. Cool. So I kind of wanted to start with oh, there we go. Oh, okay. I thought someone was talking. So I kind of wanted to start on, our first question is, how are you feeling with the current social climate? Like, and it's not, an opinion, but how inside, like how personally are you feeling? Are you taking this? How is it affecting you? Maybe how is it affecting your family? And then we can go from there, and we could and whoever can start.
That's a good question. At least for me, it makes it very uneasy. There's a lot of uncertainty and uneasiness. As how my family's taking it, Hispanic, Mexican, American household. So, and a lot of us are fairly democratic. So a lot of us just have an opinion and it's just, but all in all, it's mainly just saddening to see, everything that's going on. Not only seeing, learning about the death, about George, and then, but everyone else, because it just seems like, if it's not, George was not the first one. It's just a laundry list of individuals who unfortunately had to, meet their end, early because of police brutality and stuff like that. So all in all, it's very uneasy, and knowing that it can, even though I'm Hispanic, I'm still a brown person of color, and it can be someone, it could be me, or it could be even someone else that I know, because almost majority of my friends fall in that category.
I know it's especially rough. I know that a lot of families inside, within each other are arguing about this, depending on, on different levels, from the arrest to, the peaceful protest versus looting, so that I know that coming from also a Latinx family, there's a lot of tension.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I echo very similar feelings. I identify as Filipinx, mixed race person, and there's unfortunately, as in many communities, a lot of colorism, a lot of entrenched anti-Black racism within my ethnic community. And so even with biological family members, we have to be constantly feeling like we're pushing and pushing, and it's not necessarily a safe place to dialogue and get kind of similarity of thought process and things given all that's going on. I've also been quite sick the last couple of months, and I'm currently not teaching, so I've not felt like I can't go march in the streets. I'm not with my students to talk all of this through. So I've been really grateful for the outlet of the Pride Center to have a group of like-minded folks to be in community with in this moment. That's been, I think, for me, just so appreciated.
Lawrence, how are you feeling? Are you outraged? Are you sad?
Well, I'll just say something that's something of a cliche, but it's being a black man aware of blackness on a holistic level is too outraged. It's part of your existence, and it's just it's the same over and over again. It's the same story over and over and over and over, to the point that I expect this sort of thing to happen. There's somewhat different this time, however, is that a lot of people who did not expect this sort of thing to happen taking notice for the first time in a substantial way. And I find that interesting, somewhat encouraging. I'm in a space of what this turns out to. We've known about these sorts of things from way back before basically before anybody in this room was born. When I was just getting here in 1967, I was born April 4th, 1967. It was the spring of the summer of love in San Francisco. Hippies and flower power and Martin Luther King still breathing and visiting San Francisco. In the 60s movement and the flowery were meant to counter the violent reality of this country. We've known them with technology boldly 60 years ago. So we're just simply going back and through technology, being able to get in when it begin to work. It was started that movement and the peace movement. So it's just continuing the work.
And do you all feel that maybe is it? Do you think? So what's we've had a lot of similar situations happen in the last couple of decades too, or in the last decade. What do you think is different now versus maybe a few years ago?
At least for me, I'm just surprised in the ripple effect it had in not only in the United States but in the world. Because I was reading that it was hitting places like in Europe, in Ireland, and I think even places like South Africa. People are also participating in the movement, and for me that was actually very surprising and also very encouraging. And like granted, like I as much as I wanted to go protest, like I sprained my foot last week, so I couldn't really go, but I was there at least in spirit. So I think that was the biggest thing. That's, at least for me, I saw that was the difference.
Yeah, I've been similar to what Lawrence is describing, having taught the history of like racism and social movements in the US. So much of it feels like, God, we're like not learning the lessons. It's so much of the same stuff that's been the case for literally centuries in this country. I think what's hopeful is that there seems to be the sensibility on average is shifting a bit, it seems. When I have CEOs and company heads calling me from multiple companies wanting me to help them figure out how to be in dialogue with their employees in this moment, how to support people. I feel like the fact that people feel like they have to say something or they know that they're not on the right side of things is new. And that's very different than anything I've heard in terms of the conversation around this in the past. And so I'm so grateful for the Black Lives Matter leaders who have brought so much awareness to the issue. And to know how much it takes for our collective communities, Black and brown folks, like LGBTQ folks, to be out there in the streets, putting their employment, their possibility of getting incarcerated on the line, their physical bodies and well-being, probably a lot of fallout with their own families. It's just an amazing amount of energy that's going into this. And I'm just so hopeful that some positive, real constructive change will come out of this. And I'm also a mom, so I'm just like super worrying about everybody, like texting with my students who are out there protesting and seeing if they need a place to crash. And there's just a whole lot right now with our communities, I think.
Now, Lawrence, and I'll put this to the whole group. When we were at the flag raising ceremony in Vallejo, as well as Benicia on Monday, and Maria, you were there with us in Benicia, so thank you to you both. You were speaking eloquently about the origins of the Stonewall riots and how the work of Dr. King and Bayard Rustin and so many before in the civil rights movement in the 60s really laid that framework for us to be able to have the modern gay rights movement. You know, I think it's especially important for us as queer people to think about what that movement means, why it's important now to remember that, you know, kind of revolutionary side of our history, and to really think about how that, you know, to today and how we stand in solidarity with other marginalized communities, and we think of ourselves as being part of an interconnected, intersectional movement. I kind of wanted to get some of your feedback on that and then put it to the group as well.
As alluded to the flag raising and the sacrifices that were made by Black people and their very close allies, including some of their lives. People got killed. They gave it up for the civil rights, for the greater good. By laying that foundation, sacrifice, even the ultimate sacrifice. Life. You know, Black people went to sleep and then simply passed. We used it together with name, because that sacrifice was made, it laid a groundwork where people could be opened up to possibly accepting the same gender loving community, which is my term, the pro term for everybody. It covers all the groups without going to LGBTQIA, all that stuff. You know, collected the same gender loving community. If it was not for the civil rights movement, people's hearts would not have been even cracked open a little bit to begin to try to even consider acceptance if that had not gone down. And that's why those that made the sacrifice to this civil rights.
Yeah, thank you, Lawrence.
In the sense of moving forward.
Sorry, you froze there for a little bit. I thought you were done. I'm so sorry.
Just moving those lessons forward from the sacrifices of the civil rights movement and the germination of art and the LGBTQIA movement. It shows how much we must depend on each other to.
Definitely.
You're not going to happen in silos. It's going to be through working together.
Yeah, and I think that's like this moment can be so trauma-inducing. It can be so isolating, especially given the pandemic that's going on. And I know it's hard sometimes when you're feeling overwhelmed with a barrage of like really bad news that seems to be the norm right now. I feel like what Lawrence is saying, like our ability to come together and rely on one another and to hold on to hope, to keep the fuel going, to continue to have the hard conversations and to resist in whatever ways we're able. I feel like I know that for myself, having hope and knowing that every time I've taught my students and my classes, the younger generations, like Lawrence was describing, being in conversation with those younger generations and their new perspective and different outlooks, it's made me so perpetually hopeful, just because they're always smarter than me, always are going to do amazing, big, great things that are going to just benefit all of us, I think.
And Bernie, what are your thoughts on that? You know, the origins of Pride, and then also I think it's important to point out to folks as well that the Black Lives Matter movement was founded in a large part by queer women, and so in addition to Stonewall, we rely so much on the contributions of queer Black folks, you know, standing up for our rights, but as well as for the rights of, you know, Black folks who are being violently harassed across the country, incarcerated. And then thinking about the context that Maria mentioned about COVID, you know, Black and Latino folks are taking the brunt of COVID infections in California, unfortunately, because of things like a lack of access to healthcare, racism within our healthcare system, etc.
To speak off of like the origin of Stonewall, and I have to admit, like, I'm very sad that I barely actually learned the full origin of Stonewall and the whole like history of that. But I was actually I was frankly surprised that, you know, how we were able to, you know, join together and be able to have this outcome that we do now, though it took a while. But that's any movement, you know, to be able to actually get to that point of quote unquote being more free, essentially, and being able to live the lives that we live. And going off of like, you know, now in this situation of, and I know Maria, you said like it could be isolating, and I know like I've been feeling that too, not only because I can't really move, but also being able to, I mean, just speaking that, you know, you can only do so much, and that not only are you limited because of the whole pandemic, but now you're also limited to, if you are to help others, that increased risk of exposure to them. And then that's the whole thing about like also the increased risk given like if you are to go protest. So, you know, there's a lot of like pros and cons that need to be weighed to be able to actually, you know, take into consideration. And I think that's the worst part about it, you know, because like I feel like if we didn't have that, I feel like we probably would have seen a bigger outcome in at least people protesting, because I feel like frankly like a lot of people are still terrified, you know, because the numbers aren't getting better, and then now you have an additional layer. And like I'm just grateful, like I know people who actually went to go protest, you know, like I wish I was able to do so, but like, you know, the only thing I could do is just sit behind my social media account and, you know, shut down those who don't understand, or just frankly just spread the word. That's the yeah.
One of the things I've been thinking about as well, and I've been receiving questions from some of my friends and family, is around how do we collaborate with these movements, with Black Lives Matter, with organizations that are run by people of color. If you're a white person, how can we kind of show up in this moment, whether that's kind of stepping back and making space, or if it's, you know, amplifying certain voices. Are there some best practices or tips that you folks would like to share with our audience?
I think the biggest thing is don't step back, but support. Because I feel like what I've experienced is that a lot of individuals have not really shut down, but have ignored many people of color. And it seems like without the aid and support of those like who are like white, without them, without their support, we won't actually be able to be fully heard. If that makes sense. And other things that people or organizations can do to do better is, one, get more like cultural competency training. I feel like you can never get enough of that. Especially now, like, you have just the complexity of race, of gender, sexual orientation. It's so complex that just doing it once is not going to be enough. Within even a day, within a year, it's going to be changing. So being able to have that training to support the evolution of everything, it's important. And also, being able to support everyone. I think that's the main, like, the gist of everything. Being able to support and frankly, sit down and listen. I think that's also another thing, is listen and try to understand.
Maria, same question to you.
Yeah, I think identity and allyship are super tricky things, right? Like, as a mixed race pansexual person, what I'm wearing on a given day determines how people read my race. What I'm wearing on a given day, or how my hair is fixed or cut, determines whether or not people read me as queer or not, right? And one thing I've learned, like, being a mixed race person who's very light complected, I've benefited from a lot of light skin preference and privilege. And what I learned about that pretty quickly is that is one thing I can use to make myself an even stronger ally, potentially an advocate, because sometimes people will hear things from me that they won't always, or not able to hear from other folks. And so sometimes when people read me as straight, I have been out and proud in every workplace I've ever been, and it's given me different ways to connect with folks. And so I think, I think if you benefit from privilege that allows you to take greater risk and to advocate in a louder way, that you should not back down from those opportunities. Like Brendan was saying, you should definitely, real allyship is to take those risks and to speak out even when it's not comfortable or if it's not beneficial for you personally. I think as a society, we're all going to be in a much better place where we all are outraged when any injustice happens to anybody, even if it's not about us or a particular identity.
Well said. Well said. Lauren, same question to you, sir.
I really don't have too much to add. I'll touch on the same points that I would have. What I would say is that in some cases, you're going to approach non-white organizations or black organizations or approached by white people. There will be an inherent sense of mistrust at first when it comes to allyship. Allies who want to help things. In other words, tell the organization what to do, how you can make things. Yeah, of course, is listening, mentioned by Bernard, collaborating, and just that's one thing that not like to listen, learn, and go together. It's highly important.
And Adrian, did you want to ask the next question?
Yeah, I kind of. Oh,
sorry. Just as a little disclaimer, I am double booked, so thank you to all of you for being here. I have to leave at 7 o'clock to go to the Solano Community College Board of Trustees meeting. They're issuing their Pride Proclamation, so I will be in the same place, but I'll just be entering a different Zoom meeting. So if I exit suddenly, don't be alarmed.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to ask, what are, while we're still on the topic, what are kind of some expectations or hopes that you have out of our current situation, or what are maybe when it comes to laws or social changes, obviously presidential changes. What are some things that you expect to you really hope for in the future? What are kind of like the hope, and what are the most realistic outcomes, especially being a QTPOC?
Someone can take that first.
The hope is at the top office of the country that we have a change.
We're having a little hard time hearing you, Lawrence. Would you speak up a little bit? I'm so sorry.
We've had in the course of. Okay. Oh, it's okay.
Thank you.
Well, we would all at the top of the administration, the presidential office, that we had a change. In 1 year, we had, as I saw a meme, which is so apt, saying that in 1 year we've had of the 1918 had the Great Depression and the 1960s.
Oh, wow.
Race riots, all in less than 6 months. So whatever's going up at the top is not working. You don't get that many shots in the hole if you're doing a decent job in leadership as the president. So we are looking forward to having some change. And that no matter how disorderly that party is, and America is open-hearted enough to listen to each other and begin to work towards someone. That's rather towards repairing the idea of common.
One of the things I've been wondering, and I'll pose this question to the group as well, is a lot of the time, I think that the narrative is that a lot of these incidents are kind of, distant, and that they're in different parts of the country, and that kind of fits this convenient narrative that we have about the South or whatever region we like to think of as being more racist than we are here in California. But it's a Solano County issue. I just saw an article from the Times Herald that said that there was an African-American man shot and killed by Vallejo PD the other night at these protests. And obviously this has been an ongoing issue with police departments in Solano County, where they're killing unarmed Black men and using excessive force. I mean, that's a problem that's universal in this country, and just something that I think we all have to think about if we're committed to criminal justice reform, if we're committed to social justice, because it's impacting queer people, it impacts our family, our friends. How can we as a community in Solano get involved in ways that we can speak up and get involved on different planning commissions or attending different government meetings to speak up about this? I know that as an organization, we issued a letter condemning this violence and standing in solidarity with the African American community. And while that's very meaningful to me, I know that words can sometimes seem trite. So I'm thinking of ways that we can step up as allies and show action here locally. And I kind of wanted to hear what folks' thoughts were.
Yeah, I think one of the key things that we included in that statement was that anti-Black racism and violence is a queer issue. And I think that breaking down even the frameworks and thinking that these individual issues like the ICE issue and immigration reform, prison reform, marriage and what that means in the country, all of these things are so interrelated that I think even if in our internal frameworks that we change the way that we see them so that all of those injustices are all of our issues. So if you are at a PTA meeting or you are out in your religious communities services that weekend, that these are relevant conversations in every context all the time. And that if the conversation isn't already happening, that even just bringing up the conversation can be a huge amount of change, if that's not something that people are used to dialoguing about in that setting, And I think countywide, if the just awareness level increases, and if we if we're lucky enough to be in small enough communities where we can be in direct conversation with our elected representatives and to tell them that this is something I care about as your constituent, I really am gonna be in dialogue with you to help us make this better, and all the different ways that we are all engaged in the community. I think that we can push these issues forward.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you, Maria. Like, you know, and also like getting involved. That's the biggest thing. Like for me, like I wasn't involved in anything big until I joined Solano Pride Center, and that was around when I was in college or exiting high school. You know, being able to get involved, talking to people, networking, and like how you said, have those conversations that you might be afraid to have. Talking to friends, because if, let's say, if they if they were unsure on a topic, but once they go home, they might have, might be continually thinking about that conversation that you guys have had. And then they might talk to someone else, and eventually it'll just become that domino effect, hopefully. And that can be, and also like going to city council meetings, or listening into them, seeing how you can still have that voice, and not only in your local community, but then see how we can advance to like a more, let's say, statewide, stuff like that.
Lawrence, what are your thoughts?
I'll say that it is important to be politically and socially politically active. It is. It's too easy for us to get into conversations so filled up, don't engage social politically. We come home, we create commute, and I end up just thinking, I don't have time for that. But then it's critical to the time of these things, because not making time for it means people are making decisions. I agree, or maybe a decision was made that you somehow could have provided something valuable to you if you just put your input. It's so important that you go to the city council meetings, that you hear what people are saying, get a sense of who the players are. It's that other people bring up those social politics. We're so, in this generation, so cautioned about, we don't want to talk about things that are political. Past generations, people talk stuff out. It may not have been pretty, but they talked about it.
Yeah, I definitely feel like a lot of
time for us to be courageous and get open about the discussion.
Yeah, I definitely feel like a lot of people now are either very frank about stuff and forward, or they hide behind their social media accounts. And then, and then people are just behind that keyboard saying whatever they're saying, but are they truly doing anything about it? I think that's the biggest thing. I feel like, unfortunately, I'm going to be very kind of bashful on my generation, that a lot of people tend to be lazy. And that's the thing. They're not doing anything about it. They'll type and say whatever they're saying, but they actually won't do anything about it.
Right. I mean, I think for people who, I think it definitely, sorry, Lawrence, please. I think it takes people kind of approaching it from all angles. And I think that as, people who are engaged in the community and who are trying to help in terms of leading in some capacity, like, I think that's an interesting challenge for us. And if that's something that's happening and trending, that people don't feel able to engage and go out there and put themselves out there, how can we create programming? How can we create initiatives that will help people have a way to plug in that feels accessible and that is impactful, right? I mean, I think that's an interesting trend, if that's the reality of what's happening, and how do we, as people who are engaged, really help to bridge that gap then?
That's true.
In what ways do we engage? Like, what are we doing as a center to engage more folks? Oh, Lord.
Just I was going to touch upon something very quick. As we have these discussions with other people about these political